is an American author of 13 nonfiction women's issue books, including Tripping the Prom Queen, Toxic Friends, and You're Grounded Forever, but first let's go shopping. She writes fiction under her pen name, Susannah Marren. Her novels are Between the Tides, A Palm Beach White, A Palm Beach Scandal, and Maribelle Shadow. Susan's books focus on the gender divide, how women are positioned in our society, and their innermost feelings about themselves as daughters, mothers, sisters, friends, wives, mothers-in-law, daughters-in-law, rivals, colleagues, and lovers. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Susannah Marren. Let's begin with your background. Where did you grow up, and did it contribute to you becoming a writer?
It did. I grew up on Long Beach Island, New Jersey, for anyone who knows it in the audience, and it's a summer resort. It's kind of like Palm Beach in reverse, and it's a barrier island. And my father was a developer, and I would say it really builds courage and character to live in a place that has 5,000, well, when I was growing up a long time ago, 5,000 people in the winter and maybe 100 or 150,000 in the summer. So why not write? You have to create your own reality and your own story. So it really did contribute to that.
Great.
At the center of your novel, Maribelle Shadow, is Maribelle, who becomes a young widow within the first 15 pages. The fallout of her husband's death spins the Barrows family in unpredictable ways, and secrets and lies between Maribelle and her sister rise to the surface. What motivated you to choose this plot, and where did the original idea draw inspiration from?
Well, since Christina mentioned that I've written 13 nonfiction books, my second of the 13 was a book called Sisters Devoted or Divided. And for each of my nonfiction books, I interview a very disparate group of women, really diverse in terms of age, race, ethnicity, level of education, religion, where they live across the country. And so several hundred per title, nonfiction. And I'm always looking for the answers to how women feel, what we yearn for, what we're really pretending to be versus who we really are, and why in such a patriarchal culture that's so important, that we are the good girl and we're perceived a certain way. So when I was working on Maribelle, Sisters Devoted or Divided, I uncovered such crazy sister stories that I always knew that one day I would write a novel about 3 adult daughters and their mother, and then for another title of mine, You're Grounded Forever, but first let's go shopping. In that book, I interviewed, again, a very diverse group of women, but with daughters from the age of 3 to over 30. And there, I was really listening to the excuses we make for our daughters versus sons, if you have both, or why a mother would identify with one daughter more than the other, and what that does to the sister relationship. And so in this novel, I wanted a very dicey mother who really praised one sister off the other when, the chips are down.
Several of your novels take place right here in Palm Beach, and you mentioned popular places that we all know and love, the Norton Museum, the Colony Hotel, the Breakers. What draws you to having Palm Beach as a setting, and how important is the setting to you in your novels?
Well, the setting is very important, and I'd like to mention how I got to Palm Beach. So when I was really little, like 2, and I have an older brother, my parents were invited to Palm Beach. My mother was from Brooklyn before it was cool, and my father was from North Jersey, and they had a friend who built the Ambassador Hotel on the Strip. Their friend had built it, and in truth, he couldn't fill it, and it was Christmas. It's so interesting because there's nothing else there. And you maybe get to little hotels that are long gone because the real estate was so valuable. So my parents came here, and my father was an amateur but ranked tennis player for decades in Florida. For doubles, he was number 3 in the state for decades. And he started playing. He hadn't played since college, and my mother fell in love with the beauty and how women really presented themselves. And like I said, she'd never seen anything like it. So the day I graduated high school, they became Palm Beach residents. And I've been exposed to Palm Beach my whole life, and my children and my grandchildren. And I would walk on Worth Avenue with my mother. It was like her favorite thing to do. And I would look at all the women, and one of the studies we didn't mention, a very incendiary study that I did, it came out in 2008, is called Little White Lies, Deep Dark Secrets, The Truth About Why Women Lie. And in that study, I really looked, and by the way, I never loved the title, just, off the record. And I sold it to St. Martin's, my longtime publisher, as a book about why women keep secrets and lie for the cause, but they thought it was more like, I guess, controversial or commercial to flip it. But what we really do as women, like, for example, just to digress, in the book I mentioned Jane Pauley. I don't know if any of you remember, but when she said she was bipolar, everyone went crazy. That she wasn't supposed to be bipolar, or she wasn't supposed to reveal it, because we're all good girls, so we always do the right thing and appear the right way, and we don't want to be judged. Or Brooke Shields, when she said she had postpartum depression, right? And she and Tom Hanks were like jumping on couches, Oprah, and that whole thing. And so in that study, so that goes back to your question. You were asking me, Christina, about
Palm Beach and
Palm Beach. So here I am, thank you, on Worth Avenue with my mother, and everyone is privileged. We're not going to pretend that it's a diverse community, or that it isn't about money or beautiful homes or, a luxurious lifestyle. But I would look at the women, and I was really struck by the idea that, based on my nonfiction, that women always have secrets, and women are often disappointed or pretending that something is better or different than it is. And women are survivors, whether they're in Palm Beach, where in a capitalistic society they have it all, because either they've earned money, but most likely the demographic is that the men have earned money. So these women are walking around so stylish and with beautiful jewelry and scarves, but what lurks beneath? And so I very purposely chose Palm Beach as a really beautiful, privileged society where women have to still be vying to belong and to survive when something happens, like Samuel, Maribelle's husband, dies. It really changes everything. Then all the secrets are unleashed.
Speaking of secrets, your novel covers serious themes: betrayal, lies, loyalty, the role of wife, mother, adult daughter, endurance, and longing. You have experience writing nonfiction books, as you mentioned. Now, does your nonfiction inform your fiction, and how relevant are these themes in daily lives?
They're so relevant. And as I mentioned before, Christina, because I'm really interested in interviewing a diverse pool of women, what's so fascinating is that whether a woman earned an MBA from Harvard, or she barely got through high school, if she's unhappy with her mother-in-law, if there is rivalry in the workplace, that's my book, Tripping the Crown Queen. I look at rivalry everywhere, but in the workplace, if she has a difficult daughter, if she's unhappy with her husband, if she's secretly having an affair, it doesn't matter what she earns or where she lives or her level of education. These are emotional situations that are really universal for women.
You are a nationally renowned observer of women's relationships based on your nonfiction writing, as well as teaching gender studies at Marymount Manhattan College for many years. Women are meant to do the right thing, to be caregivers, yet it does not quite play out in the novel, as we learn. How do these expectations affect our daily lives? And do you feel that readers will see their own relationships reflected in the book?
I hope that they do. I hope that someone reads this book and says, wow, I know someone like that, or there's my sister, or boy, that reminds me of my mother. But I do believe that in the groups that women know, that they will see what each of these characters stand for. And I think that it's very tricky for women. It really is, because we were held to such a high standard. And there's, my biggest thing, because Christina's interviewed me before, Stacey's been there. This is the biggest thing that I will say for women. Until there's equal pay for equal work, there's no equality in a capitalistic, materialistic society. We just can't be, because we're not treated the same. So everything that women do in their personal lives and financial lives is some kind of compromise to get where they need to be. And women are very multi-layered. And, no spoiler here, but Lucinda, the mother of Maribelle, and her other two daughters, Caroline and Raleigh, she's really a dicey woman. But, and my, I'll just say this, my youngest of my three children, she's a very fine writer. And we had this conversation. I would love to know what the audience thinks. We were talking about, do you have to have likable characters in your novels? And do you? Because in the nonfiction, the women, of course, they're always anonymous. They can't tell that, anonymity is guaranteed. But they tell you how they really feel. Well, so Lucinda, I don't know if she's likable, but I would hope that we admire her ambition. Ambition, another very tricky topic for women. Her, is she aggressive? Well, I would say what really was interesting for me to write and to contemplate was how she played one daughter against another and how they seem like such a perfect family. But in truth, they come from nowhere. Again, I don't want to give away the story. And everything that she's achieved has been so far because she's, hardest.
That ties in right to our next question. You do have eclectic characters in your novel. Social ambition, money, and reputation. These matter greatly to Lucinda, who is the matriarch that she was describing. Yet she comes from humble beginnings and has worked to be accepted. Do you think she reflects what many women feel, and why?
I do. I think that if we knew the truth about Lucinda, and I'm writing the sequel now to this book, I've been asked to write the sequel, we would be empathetic and also probably really disturbed by who she is and how she got to where she is. But this isn't the same for men, so we were saying that. So I think that she is very realistic, and I think that women work harder because they have to get where they are. And look, within the first 12 pages of this book, Samuel dies, and then everyone has to really recalibrate, and like you said, loyalty is the big issue, and what's betrayal. So everything is fine for women often until what we call in screenwriting the inciting incident. And the inciting incident in this story, which is a suspense story too, is really who was Samuel and who was he to each of these women.
You mentioned that you're in the sequel. I did notice that all the points of view in this novel are the three sisters. Will Lucinda have her own point of view in the upcoming novel?
It's so funny that you asked that, right? Because it's all how they see their mother. I'm not doing it in the sisters' voices this time. I'm switching back to how I wrote A Palm Beach Wife, which is omniscient first person.
Is there one character that you identify with the most? And is there a character that you aspire to be more or alike or less?
I would say that I identify with Maribelle the most because she really exemplifies how a young woman would put one foot in front of the other. She has a great job. She is the editor and director of the fictive Palm Beach Confidential magazine. And she has this really dashing, handsome young husband who also is from Panhandle, where the Barrow's family is from. And everything seems okay until it isn't, and she's really put to the test. And I can understand that, For women, we are taught, and I think even young women today are taught, I know this is so, that if you put one foot in front of the other and you do the right thing, that you'll get the reward. And there are no guarantees in life. I mean, what could be more shocking than for Maribelle to hear that Samuel's gone in an instant? And then just what he left. And then, of course, another question that really fascinates me, because I've done 3 studies on the role of wife in America, one on second wives, and one, this is probably my most academic nonfiction book, it's called The New Wife, The Evolving Role of the American Wife. And I looked at for the last 5 decades about wifing in America. So, the real question is, and I think it's subtextual, but I'm asking the reader, who are we as readers and as the women in this book to marry the men whom we married? What do we know about ourselves? And what do we know about the men? And you go on, and it's fine until, again, an exciting incident. So I have found in my nonfiction books that in times of great sorrow and great joy, that women understand their power and who the others who surround them really are.
Your novel definitely has a lot of mystery elements. The surprise ending is what your fiction promises the reader. Did you know all along how this novel would end?
I did. When I write fiction, and so different from writing nonfiction, I mean, like, for instance, let me just interrupt myself. When I did the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law book, I was on tour for like 2 years. So many mothers-in-law came, so few daughters-in-law, just underscores my results. Because the mothers-in-law really want, particularly when they're grandchildren, they really want a relationship with their daughter-in-law. And the daughters-in-law are kind of like, I don't relate to the family, I just want you. And so things are really shifting. Like, I was a very dutiful daughter-in-law. And the reason I wrote the book, let me quote Toni Morrison. She said, but I paraphrase, if there's a book that you need to read and you can't find it, you should write it. So I went, after I came back from my honeymoon, from when I was 23, Crystal was married to my children's father. And my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were like very different than before the wedding. I went to the bookstores and couldn't find a book. And then 3 children later, the things were really spiraling out of control. And I thought, I better write this book. And it was very comforting to listen to both the mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law and to hear what they had to say.
What is your writing process, and what would your advice be to aspiring writers?
Well, that's the most important part of that question. If there's anyone in this room who writes or has someone in her family or his family or someone close who writes, I say you've got to write. It's so easy to make excuses. It's such a solitary discipline. It's not for everyone, but if you love writing and you want to write, you should write no matter what. My writing process, not like others, I have been on payrolls with really famous writers, and we're all asked this question, and some of them say, like, well, I was on a panel with him, but the late Cormac McCarthy was once interviewed in a magazine. I'm so struck by what he said, again, paraphrasing. He said he just needed an empty room with a table, a chair, lots of pencils, and legal pads, and hours on end, or something like that. And I went, wow, what a luxury. I write and have written because I taught for 23 years. You have a stack of papers and students to answer their emails and advisement to meet them in faculty meetings. I've written a lot at night. And, but some people would say, well, aren't you tired? You need to write when you need to write. I've been on contract, it's my 17th book. So I've been under contract, and you just have to write. They're expecting it, or the publishers aren't like, oh yeah, take your time. They're like, get the book in. So, I've learned to really do that. And when my children were little, I probably gave them a lot of candy, like I watched things on the screen so I could write that.
You mentioned earlier touring for 2 years straight. Could you talk about what that's like for an author?
Well, it's really changed. For people who are seasoned readers in this realm, when my nonfiction came out years ago, I was on TV, even the National, for almost every book I wrote. And if you had an interesting topic, there were producers at these, at CBS and NBC, and where they wanted a 5-minute segment with the writer. How'd you do your research? What did you learn? But that's over. And so book tours were very different. I once went from Cleveland to Boston to Chicago. It was probably kind of a stupid way that the publisher set it up years ago, and I wore like the same thing everywhere. But today, with you have to have lots of wardrobe. During the pandemic, I did a whole tour virtually for Palm Beach Candle, my second of the 3 Palm Beach novels. So things have really changed, but libraries and going out and meeting the readers is still my favorite.
And we are very happy to have you here. My last question is, what are a few of your favorite books, and what is up next for you?
Well, up next is the sequel to this, and I've never been asked for a sequel before. And it's really amazing how much I know already about, the backstory, because I really work hard on my characters before I start writing a book. And like I always say, Lucinda, even though she's made a lot of money, the family's made a lot of money, she still goes to Costco for catch. So, I know what they do on many levels. So I'm working on that. And then I have a nonfiction book that's about to go out. It's a proposal. And again, I would call it, if that might sound dated, a women's issue book about how women are positioned to the society and how they own their feelings. One of my favorite topics. Who do I read? I read everything I can. Years ago, my son and I went to hear John Irving speak at the 92nd Street Y. Place was packed. For those of you who know, it was an auditorium. And the questions were filtered, like, people who worked at the Y had them ahead. It was really very controlled. He once signed the box. They were pre-signed, because I go to a lot there, and it was very different. So here's the question that was posed. They said, who do you read? And who said, and my son and I both looked at each other, and he went, and I like John Irving. Who do you read? And he said he didn't have time to read anyone else. He was sure there were some good writers. Again, I'm paraphrased, not quoting. That he was certain there were a lot of good writers out there, but in his lifetime, whatever it would be, he wouldn't have the time to write all the books in his head and something like that. I feel kind of the opposite. I feel like I owe it to writers, alive and dead, and to the marketplace and what goes into a library, like you choose what booksellers choose, what the bestseller list is about to read. So I read a very diverse group of, all different kinds of writers. So I just read a book that a friend gave me that came out in maybe 2000 called On Green Dolphin Street by a man named Sebastian Fox. And the reason I would know who he is, because I do not. I also tried to know a lot about writers. And a lot of writers is that he wrote a book that became a movie called Charlotte Gray. Well, that sounds familiar. Yeah. And I thought it was a fascinating book. And I also saw the differences in how fiction is written now and 20 years ago. In terms of pacing, it's like watching a movie. Like I always used to, when I, was teaching at Marina, I sometimes taught the 60s. Not as well as gender as my topic, in a critical thinking writing department. And we would watch Deer Hunter. Well, I don't know if any of you, what a hard movie to watch, but it went on and on, maybe 15 minutes with the first, the setup and they have to leave for Vietnam. You can never go with that. It would be 3 minutes. Because the attention span of the viewer and the reader has changed so. And that's taken into consideration. Anyway, I'm reading Kristen Hanna's book right now. It's about Vietnam. Very interesting. And I read the Fox book, and I love Edith Wharton and Anthony Trollope. I think William Steinman was probably one of the most brilliant writers who ever lived. And then, in graduate school, I was fortunate, actually blessed, to have, if you can believe it, Ed Doctorow as my thesis advisor. So, and he had taught, I went to Sarah Lawrence undergrad, and he was there. And then he also taught at Columbia. And I started my MFA at Columbia, but I got married. And when I had 2 children, I decided I had to get my degree. And I had to have a 3rd child, but I was like, I stopped. And by then, the teachers that I knew, the writing teachers, like Alway Cannell Cohen and Doctorow, they had all moved to NYU. So I finished my master's at NYU, and he took 5 students a year, and I'd say that he was really my mentor in every way. So that was really amazing.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure having you here. We're going to open up the floor for some questions from the audience, if anyone has any questions.
I have one question. Why did you have so much information about the clothing and the pump and all of that? Why did you feel it was necessary to include that constantly in the book?
That's a good question. When I sold the Palm Beach novels to St. Martin's, my editor there really wanted that kind of detail. Somewhere between product placement, but not really, and the effect of a society. It's interesting because I mentioned Edith Wharton. I actually went back to out of all of her work because I've read all of it, The Custom of the Country, where designers aren't named, but the detail, the style, and what's appropriate. And so this is kind of the equivalent for today. And because in Palm Beach, it's such an imprimatur, the way that people dress and present themselves, and again, judgments. Like if someone was wearing something that was expensive or cheap, and how women just calculate. It's almost like, and I should have mentioned this, I also chose Palm Beach because in a society that's meant to have so much, it's almost like the higher you rise, the harder you fall. So that's the case in all of my Palm Beach novels, a woman put to the test. And so for Lucinda and her daughters, it was very important how they took care. They had Sears catalogs back in, from both so like that. So, doesn't.
I lived in Palm Beach a number of years, and I know exactly why you did that, because the business of Palm Beach is society. And that is where you live, and since people don't have jobs, most of the women, where they go to work every day, it's society, and society is going to events. And you go to lunches, you go to galas, you go to all sorts of things, and everyone looks at everyone else and sizes them up by what they're wearing and what their jewels are.
Absolutely right. I hope it's authentic. Excuse me, because I meant it to be. And I agree with you completely. And it's funny that you mentioned that women don't really work in Palm Beach. So when A Palm Beach Wife came out, the Mandel Library near Clematis, maybe not Clematis, the area, asked me to be one of the authors at the tables that they do for Food for Thought, their fundraiser. And when we sat down, there were like maybe 8 other people, 8 or 10 at the table. And I asked the women, they were with partners or husbands, and I asked each of them to say, where they lived in the area and what they did. And one of the women named over, and she said to me, you must notice none of us live on the island. We don't live east. And on the island, no one works who's about the people. And just to underscore that, I don't know how many of you read the Vanity Fair article that came out about Palm Beach in the last issue. But it's really interesting because she mentioned something that I've been mentioning since 2019. That's when the pub date was for Palm Beach Wife, and that is that it's a very matriarchal culture. And let me just digress from one moment. I was very struck because, as I told you, I've been coming here since I was a little girl. I was very struck by how my mother felt so confident and important at every decade. And so did her friends. And of course, they were coiffed and they were jazzed up and they were going to dinners. And she did not work, but she should have worked. But in any case, just the whole identity, but how strong the women felt it every decade. Ageism is so harsh in contemporary America. And I always admired how women seemed to walk the walk in Palm Beach at any age. So I really wanted to have all different age women in this book. And so Mrs. A, and she's even more prominent in the Palm Beach Scandal as a secondary character, but she's of course older. And that really has always struck me about Palm Beach as well. But when that woman leaned over and said women don't work, so the Vanity Fair article it's pretty long, but it's worth reading. But it does say Palm Beach has always been a matriarchy, whether the women were, and again I paraphrase, whether the women had money just from the husbands or family, or it was their own earnings. So it all loops into how money is perceived. But the women feel very strong, and I really like baby. Yes.
I think it's helpful to realize that Palm Beach society, to me, is a caricature of every society that each one of us lives in, and how, while you can fault Lucinda for being so vacuous and all she wants to do is copy everybody else and one-up everybody, each one of us in our own little world struggles for acceptance or conforms when maybe we didn't exactly mean to, but it's the path of least resistance. For instance, if you're a farmer or a farmer's wife, it's the attire with the overalls, and would be looked down upon if you didn't wear overalls, let's say. So at every level, what goes on in Palm Beach, while we all say, oh my goodness, is that a ridiculous group of women and a ridiculous society, we all live within what we do is dictated by the world that we live in. And he said,
I use the word all. I take exception to that. I could say most.
yes,
But
no,
do not say all, please.
okay, I
So
understand.
you should say many.
No, I understand, because there are, I'm not discounting the fact that there are individuals who live very individualistic lives, but I am talking about the sort of the
Conformist.
yes. So that while Lucinda represents what she's trying to conform to and what she's trying to hide about her beginnings, a lot of us, not all of us, do that at our own, call it level.
I agree with you. And actually, two of the nonfiction titles I didn't mention, Toxic Friends, the book I wrote up to, again, a very large pool, well, a couple hundred, and then a questionnaire as well, pool of women in terms of female friendships, young women to much older women. And so the subtitle is The Antidote for Women Stuck in Complicated Friendships. And then Tripping the Prom Queen, The Truth About Women in Rivalry. And I listened in both of those, research projects to women describing what conformity means and the price of sticking with a friend who's kind of the leader. Because I have like 8 types of friends in that book. And, the fallout would be so difficult that she'll sort of suck it up, even though something egregious has happened. And again, it doesn't matter if you're in Palm Beach or you're in some rural area or you're a farmer. These are the emotional issues and the positioning of women for survival. Survival for women is different, It's very nuanced, and it's social acceptance, and women really want to belong. So they conform also in order to belong. In Tripping the Prom Queen, apropos what you said about groups, I interviewed a bowling league in the Midwest and the women who belonged. And I interviewed a tennis league, sort of, a setup, but that was revolving each week in Miami. And I have to tell you the complaints for this day, that they were absolutely mirroring each other in terms of attitude and climbing up, and one person caught into another player, or you needed a friendship. And then mothers compete, grandmothers compete. We compete, and the longer we live, longevity just adds to what starts in kindergarten. My eldest grandchild, Julia, she'd be so excited I mentioned her name here. She was in first grade, and she was telling me who was the athlete, who was the it girl, who was the brainy one. I mean, we are, and then how do we fit in? What do we need? How do we click? How do we fit in? Tripping the Prom Queen, I'll just say this really quickly. This was a very poignant story. I interviewed a woman in her 60s, and she said to me that when she was in high school, she was short with frizzy hair, and she always needed to go on a diet. And then she got to college and she bought heels and she learned how to straighten her hair, and she was a really good student, and she lost weight and, swam or something. And then years later, she was widowed and she had to make money. And she decided to work in this travel agency. So it was a while ago, because now you feel become mine, I guess. And she said that the two women who ran the agency were the prom queen and the runner-up in high school. They were much taller and they were blonde for real, and they were, the football heroes loved them, but now they were all women in their 60s. 2 of the 3 were widowed, 1 was divorced, and everything was equal. So life has a way of also, showing us where we fit in and what is real, what is really the truth, and what is worth pursuing, and being our authentic selves.
So I admire you, and I can't wait to read some of the other books that you decided. And with one they had children and the boys or girls, and how are you raising them differently based on the research?
I have 2 girls and a son, and they're really old. And my son has 2 little girls who are 2 and 4. And if he were here right about now, he would interrupt and say, "Mom, you treated me so differently than you treated my sister." And I think he might feel that way, but my story is complicated because their father died. And I had to get the kids, through. And my daughters are almost 7 years apart. My son's in the middle. So do we identify with our daughters more? There is so much evidence way beyond my research, because whenever I do a nonfiction book, I interview the women, I look at pop culture examples, and I also look at serious treatises and psychological, research and kind of put it all together, and even film and literature and what we're shown. A good example of the very matriarchal sister family, where you really wonder how they were raised, is the Kardashians. I'm very interested in that. So did I raise my girls differently? I hope that I gave them all the same message, that you have options. It's never too late to reinvent yourself and to really believe in yourself. I hope they all understood that. But I think that my girls are just slightly clownish, but they didn't. So yeah, I think that's the way it goes. And in interviewing the mothers of all daughters, like 3 daughters, 2 daughters, 5 daughters, wow, again, a lot of it went into Lucinda and how she really navigates her path after Samuel dies with each daughter. I think it's very hard for the mothers. Some mothers say, "My daughter is just like me. How could I not be closest to her?" And other mothers say, "Oh my God, my daughter who exceeds my dreams, that's the daughter out really watching and supporting." So, it's collective and then it's individual, what we do with our kids.
I had a question. It mentions you did research with mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law. Did you come to any conclusions?
I did. I really did, and it was useful for me personally and my group of friends, and I hope others, and I hope a lot of others. I think that the mothers-in-law today often still want, in a very changing world, for their daughters-in-law to be the same race and religion. And what you would say in a sociology course or in a gender course is the theory of homogamy. Does anyone know? I would teach my students this. The theory of homogamy is like with like. So you marry the same religion, race, level of education, socioeconomic, level mostly. And that is the old world. That's when you married the boy next door, or you married your parents' friend's son, when you met him in Palm Beach, and then you got married, when you were in your 20s. That's how it used to work. But the world has really changed. And the mother-in-law often still holds on to that belief, especially about religion. I found religion was a very big factor. But the daughters-in-law aren't looking for a new family. So daughters-in-law today are, shall I say, much less invested in respecting and embracing their in-laws. So they're like, I married you, so I went this race and you're that race. So I'm sorry it bothers your mother. I live with you. Sunday, take the kids. I'll stay home. And a lot of that happens. And what really, as I mentioned before, frustrates the mother-in-law is when there are grandchildren. Yeah, well, you would grow up, yeah. And that's why I think all the mothers-in-law would show up. So I did speaking gigs all over for that. And I would say that 80 or 90% of the audience was mothers-in-law. Young mothers-in-law who had been at it forever. And when Monster-in-Law, did anyone ever see that Jane Fonda movie? I couldn't wait to see it, having written my book. When I went to see it, what I thought was really interesting was that at the very end of the film, Elaine Strip, right, she is Jane Fonda's mother-in-law, Jennifer Lopez, who is a different race, and is married to Matthew McConaughey, the actor in this movie, Jane Fonda's son in the movie, and she's as mean-spirited to Jane Fonda as Jane Fonda has been to her daughter-in-law. So when I did the research, because I always look at real women and famous women for all of my nonfiction, I'm sure most of you know this, but I want to say it anyway. So Eleanor Roosevelt had the meanest mother-in-law, Sarah Eleanor Roosevelt, and she was still mean to her own daughters-in-law, and that's documented. So she did the same thing as what was written in Monster-in-Law, the movie. So you say to yourself, what can I learn to do better? And a lot of mothers-in-law don't really subscribe to the idea that the son's happiness is most important because they're more traditional, that it has to be many factors. And the daughters-in-law today feel that, a very personal happiness. So that's what I really found. Any other questions?
I have when you sat down to write fiction versus your nonfiction where there's a lot of research, you're creating the characters. How do the characters come to you?
I think you asked me this, I didn't really answer before. I have been with the characters in this novel for years. And I was so happy to finally write the book. I have notebooks about them. And the characters are so visceral to me and they're so real that I think about them a lot. And I understand their motivation. So before I start a book, because I come out of the nonfiction world where you do a whole annotated table of contents, read a book, and the chapters are there, I really do plot the book. But when I knew Samuel would travel in the beginning, and I knew exactly what the end would be, and then I needed to figure out by plot and character development what would drive the story to that end. So the characters, I can really see them. Oh, this has been optioned for a series, so we'll see. Not so sanguine it won't happen, but it has been optioned thus far. So the reason I thought of that is because sometimes I'm asked who would play the characters, and I think of Lucinda as maybe Laura Linney or Sarah Jessica Parker, but because not Sarah Jessica, Meredith Louise Parker. Because remember, Lucinda had Maribelle when she was only like 19, so she's a very young mother, and Maribelle is 39. So I think of Emily Blunt as when I think of Maribelle. I think of Anne Hathaway when I think of Caroline, who's like the perfect middle child, if there's such a thing. Because I really wanted to look at family systems, who could sit where when I wrote this book. And I think of someone very dreamy for Raleigh, the third daughter. Someone who's really don't touch the ground. So like Emma Watson. She might work, she's kind of dreamy. Any other questions? Yes.
Going back to mother-in-laws for a moment, did you find that if the daughter-in-law
was the wife of the son, of course, and there was only another son in the family, then she would be treated differently than if there was a daughter in the family.
I think the sisters-in-law have a lot to contribute to the whole gestalt of the mother-in-law, daughter-in-law bond. The daughter-in-law works, and the daughter-in-law's mother is like, in I don't know, another state far away with a big career. So the comfort of the mother-in-law is appreciated, and that fits both needs. The mother-in-law's need and the daughter-in-law. Or the mother-in-law never had a daughter. She only has a son or sons, and she really embraces this young woman. But if the daughters and the mother are very tight, and the brother, son, husband brings home this wife, she'll go stand your chance. It's really painful. It's really disappointing. Or if the daughter-in-law is very close with her own mother, she doesn't really need what her mother-in-law has to offer. So it's all different scenarios that play out with that relationship.
To piggyback on this question, would you say if you have a family of variable sons and daughters, where the son falls, whether he's the oldest, the male, or the youngest, if that would have any effect?
Birth order? I do birth order in terms of the wife he brings home. Well, let's face it, whatever the eldest child does in contemporary American culture, and many other, I think, groups as well, the first child often sets the tone for as I said, I'm really interested in family systems and how they play out. So I think it always has an effect, like coming back to this book. So the first two daughters marry the right men, and they come into the family business. That's Roan. And Raleigh marries an artist, which isn't really the template that Lucinda wants, but everyone forgives Raleigh. The older two sisters are very competitive, but Raleigh is embraced by everyone. She is cut a lot of slack, and it's because she's the youngest. So birth order always matters, and who goes first with these, by bringing a husband, a stranger, into the home like that.
Any other questions?
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you to the team.